I've got some thoughts about that. I'm also very, very interested to hear your thoughts about it. Okay, so post in the comments again, and let's see if we can put together a really solid answer for this, because I think there's some very interesting nuances to this. So here's my thoughts on it. My thoughts are, as you know, like a broken record, Asher, it depends. So what does it depend on? It is true that production costs in Australia are typically higher than somewhere like China. Okay, so production costs, simply because wages, rent, the fact that we have to import a lot of the raw materials and the raw goods into Australia to then produce them, things like that. Okay, however, there's some mitigating factors, and they are the time to get a product produced is actually faster here in Australia. It's actually much faster to get a product produced, in my experience anyway, here in Australia, which means that you can be selling faster. So you can kind of argue that what you lose on the front end, you actually make up for by being able to get it to market quicker. Okay. There's also much lower freight costs, of course, because you're not freighting a product from China into Australia. You're just freighting it domestically within Australia. Typically as well, there is a lower minimum order quantity here in Australia than there is from China, for instance. And reordering as well is not only much simpler, but also much faster, because it hasn't got to come from China to Australia. And so oftentimes, if you suddenly get a massive run on your products, which is a good thing, but if you need to reorder from China, you end up having to ship your products air freight to get them in, and your profit margins is blown apart. All right, so that's something else to consider as well. You can as well visit the factory much easier here in Australia than schlepping off to China and going and doing it in China. And of course, when you get to the factory, there's a language and a cultural affinity too, which is not to be discounted. It's not to be discounted. And for me, and this is contentious, but I stand by it, there is a different attitude to business in Australia and competing with sellers in Australia versus China. It is very, very rare to find Aussie factory selling on Amazon. It's very rare. They're not interested in doing that. They don't give a shit about doing that. They want to sell B2B, not B2C. However, in China, that's not the case. That's not the case. And so there's a good argument to be made for taking that into consideration as well, because if you put together a product in Australia, you can be very sure that the factory is not going to start selling that same product. If you do that in China, you cannot be as sure. And you do not have the legal protections for intellectual property in China that we do here in Australia. So that's another thing to consider, okay? What else? There is much more regulation around production and quality control in Australia than there is in China. Much more regulation around that. You've also then got, of course, if you develop your products and produce your products in Australia, you can then say made in Australia on your products, which I think has got a kudos, it's got a cachet to it. Certainly when you compare it to made in China, it's night and day. And I think as well, if you're then exporting your products out of Australia and selling in somewhere like India, which is what I do, there's a massive advantage to do that, because products that are made outside of India are viewed very, very highly. However, India views products that are made in China the same way it views its own products. Low quality, pretty crappy, the quality is not there. Versus a product that's made in Australia, it's viewed very, very highly, and you can charge a lot more for it. A lot more for it. So that's something to consider as well. So where does that leave us? I don't know. So it depends on the product, I guess. If it's a generic Me Too product, like you're selling spatulas or something ridiculous like that, then I don't get that there's a great argument for buying in Australia. But as soon as you get out of that Me Too market and go into a different marketplace, which is really where you ought to be, there's a very good argument for getting your stuff made domestically here in Australia or in the USA, wherever it may be. There's a very good argument for that. Let's have a look. What you got to say? Michael English, don't go, you can make lots. Depends, I know. And that ought to be my friggin' last name. Neil, it depends, Asher. Save on shipping. Freight is expensive, says Anita. You can save on your shipping, says Kathy. Buying price, all depends on that, says Hayden. Will the supplier want to take back? Here's a good one from Hayden. So Hayden says, will the supplier want to take back the product if it's not done properly to send it back to China versus sending it back to Australia? Lots to think about with that. I sold Aussie products in the USA. I do need a t-shirt. I believe Mr. Holland is organising one for me. Hey, thanks so much for watching that video, and I hope that you got some massive value from it. Before you go, do you live in Australia? If you do, this is for you. Would you like to learn how to sell things on Amazon here in Australia? Would you like to know what sells really, really well and what sells for the maximum amount of profit? Would you like to know where you can source those products from, whether that be in China or here in Australia, and how to source them so you pay bottom dollar and get maximum value for what you're doing? If you do, please subscribe to my channel and like this video, and you'll learn that and much more. It's the exact same information that people like Jeff from New South Wales I've used to make $45,000 a month on Amazon, that Sue, who's from the sunny coast, has used to purchase herself a brand spankly BMW every single year as a result of her e-commerce business, and the lovely Kate from Bowral in New South Wales has used to make $32,000 a year on a month, not a year, a month on Amazon, and indeed Anthony, who makes $15,000 a month on Amazon, selling, as he puts it, odds and sods. If you'd like to learn the exact same information that they use to maximize their profits for their Amazon businesses, subscribe to this video, like my channel, post below if you want me to teach you something. Okay, I'm out of here. Speak to you soon. Bye. Subscribe. Do it now.